photo album full of people I've never met. A strange discovery. I found the album in the attic. It was buried under a pile of old clothes and dust-covered boxes, wedged between a broken lamp and a stack of yellowed newspapers. I almost didn't notice it at first, but something about it drew me in. It was leather-bound, old but well-preserved, with an ornate floral pattern embossed on the cover. There was no title, no markings, just a thick, heavy book filled with photographs. I flipped it open, and my blood ran cold. Every page was filled with people I had never seen before. Not a single familiar face, not a single person I recognized. Yet something about them felt wrong. I should have closed the album. I should have put it back where I found it. But I didn't, because I noticed something else. The last page was empty. Faces that shouldn't exist. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a family album passed down through generations, filled with distant relatives I'd never met. That made sense. But the more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. The photographs weren't just old. They were too old. Some were faded black and white daguerreotypes, the kind you'd see from the mid-1800s. Others were grainy Polaroids from what looked like the 1970s. But in every single picture, no matter the era, there was something off. Some people had their eyes shut, as if they were sleeping. Others were posed in ways that felt unnatural, too stiff, too still. One man in a Victorian suit had an expression that looked almost pained, his mouth slightly open as if frozen in mid-scream. A woman in a 1940s dress stood in the corner of a dimly lit room, her hands clasped together in front of her stomach. At first she looked normal, but when I looked closer, her fingers were bent backwards. I slammed the album shut. Something was wrong with these pictures. Something was wrong with this book. A familiar face. I tried to forget about it. I placed the album back in the attic, told myself it was just an old, creepy artifact from the past. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those faces, those lifeless expressions, those frozen stares. And worse, I had the overwhelming feeling that they were watching me. By morning, my curiosity got the best of me. I went back to the attic, pulled out the album, and flipped through the pages again. And that's when I saw it. A new picture. One that hadn't been there before. And this time, I recognized the face. It was me. The album takes what it wants. I couldn't breathe. The picture showed me sitting at my kitchen table, wearing the exact same clothes I had on right now. My hands were resting on the wooden surface, my expression blank, my eyes staring straight ahead. The lighting, the shadows, it was as if the picture had been taken just moments ago. But that was impossible. I checked my phone. No one had taken my picture. No one had been in my house. So how did it get in the album? My hands trembled as I turned to the next page, and my stomach dropped. Another new picture. This time, I was standing in my bedroom, looking at the mirror. But in the reflection, something was behind me. A shadowy figure, too tall, too thin, with hollow, empty eyes. I slammed the album shut and threw it across the room. I wanted it gone. I wanted it out of my house. But when I picked it up again, it was still warm to the touch, like something inside it was alive. The final page, I had to get rid of it. I grabbed a lighter from my kitchen drawer, took the album outside and set it on the ground. I lit the flame, and as soon as it touched the leather cover, a scream ripped through the air. Not from me. Not from outside, from the book. I stumbled back as the flames refused to take. The fire flickered, hissed, then died out completely. The album was untouched, but when I opened it again, the last page was no longer empty. A new photograph had appeared. It showed me lying in bed. My eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and my mouth was slightly open, as if I had just taken my last breath. It's watching. I don't know what to do. The album won't burn. The pictures keep changing. Every time I look, there's a new one. And I don't know when it will happen, but I think I already know how my story ends. The radio that only plays a dead man's voice, a haunting find. I bought the radio at a yard sale. It was an old-fashioned wooden tabletop model, the kind with large tuning dials and a crackling speaker. The man selling it was eager to get rid of it, practically shoving it into my hands when I asked about the price. "Just take it," he said. "No charge, just take it and go." I should have known something was wrong. But at the time, I thought I'd found a great piece of vintage decor. I took it home, set it on my bedside table, and turned the dial. And that's when I heard the voice of the dead. At first, I thought it was a normal radio broadcast. The static hissed and popped, and then a low, raspy voice emerged from the speakers. "Can you hear me?" I froze. The way the voice spoke, slow, deliberate, hollow, sent chills up my spine. I turned the dial, flipping through stations. Nothing but static. I turned it back, and the voice was still there. "You can hear me, can't you?" I slammed the radio off. My heart pounded in my chest. It must have been a prank, I told myself. Maybe some kind of signal interference. But that night, I made a mistake. I turned it on again, and this time, the voice said something else. "You have my radio now." A voice that shouldn't exist. The next morning, I did some research. The radio was from the 1950s, made by a company that had long gone out of business. Nothing special about it. But when I searched the yard sale address, I found something that made my skin crawl. A man named Richard Halloway had lived there, and 2 years ago, he died, murdered in his own home. His killer was never found. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. Could it be? Was it his voice on the radio? That night I turned it on again. This time, the voice was waiting for me. "I know who killed me. It knows I'm listening." I wanted to stop. I should have stopped, but something about the voice, about him, drew me in. "You have to help me," Richard said. "I can't rest until the truth is known." I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. "How?" I whispered. The radio hissed. Then, the attic. "Go to the attic." My blood ran cold. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go up there, but I did. The truth in the attic. I climbed the creaking ladder, pushing the attic door open. Dust swirled in the air, the smell of mildew thick and suffocating. Then I saw it. A wooden box tucked away in the corner. With trembling hands, I opened it, and inside I found a stack of letters. The handwriting was messy, frantic, written on yellowed paper. "You promised you'd keep me safe. I know what you did. You can't hide from me forever." The last letter was dated 2 days before Richard's death, and it was signed by the man who gave me the radio. The radio knows everything. I drove straight back to the house. The yard sale was over. The house was empty. The man, Richard's killer, was gone. That night, I turned the radio on one last time. "He's running," the voice whispered, "but he can't hide forever." Then, the static faded to silence, and the radio never spoke again. The haunted painting that cries a mysterious auction find. I never believed in haunted objects, not really. But that changed when I bought the painting. I found it at an estate auction buried among old furniture and dusty trinkets. It was a portrait of a woman, painted in deep, muted colors. She had sad eyes, almost as if she had been crying. Something about it drew me in. I had to have it. So I placed my bid and won. I had no idea what I was bringing home. Strange occurrences begin. The night I hung the painting in my living room, I had trouble sleeping. There was a strange feeling in the house, like I wasn't alone. I brushed it off as excitement from the auction, but the next morning something was different. The woman's face, her eyes looked wet, as if she had been crying. I ran my fingers over the surface. The paint was smooth, dry. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, a soft whimpering, coming from the painting. The sound of sorrow. At first I thought it was the house settling, old pipes, maybe, but the sound got louder each night. Soft at first, then full, choked sobs. It always started at exactly 3 a.m. I searched the room, checked outside, even recorded the sound on my phone. But the recording captured nothing, only silence. I started avoiding the living room at night. But the crying, it followed me. A terrible discovery. I needed answers. I went back to the auction house, asking about the painting's origin. The auctioneer paled when I mentioned it. "That painting belonged to Eleanor Caldwell," he said. "She killed herself 5 years ago." Chills ran down my spine. Eleanor had been a wealthy recluse, obsessed with that painting. They found her in the same room where it hung, a bottle of pills beside her body. And after her death, people swore the painting changed. They claimed her face looked sadder, like she was crying. It wants to be heard. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to burn the painting, get rid of it forever, but something stopped me. That night, I stayed awake until 3 a.m. When the crying started, I whispered, "Eleanor, are you there?" The sobbing stopped. Then, a voice, soft, shaky, "Help me." The air turned ice cold, and in the dim light, a single tear rolled down the woman's painted cheek. The final plea. I knew then that Eleanor was trapped. Her pain, her sorrow, it was still inside the painting. She needed to be set free. So I did the only thing I could think of. I took the painting and buried it beside her grave. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house was silent. And when I returned the next morning, the painting was gone.